И также мы очень рады приветствовать вас на этом первом или после долгого времени первом настоящем гибридном мероприятии, потому что некоторые из вас имеют возможность участвовать здесь вживую сегодня, и также примерно около 100 участников ожидаем, что они подключатся онлайн. На этой неделе проходит в Кыргызстане неделя креативной экономики, и наша партнерская программа Policy Innovation Facility в взаимодействии или при поддержке правительства привезла в Кыргызстан эксперта проекта по креативной экономике, который с местным и также правительством, госорганами, предпринимателями и ассоциациями в креативной экономике делится современными подходами того, как развивать креативную экономику и креативные предприятия. Мы тоже очень рады, что можем его приветствовать здесь сегодня, чтобы он поделился своими знаниями, чтобы вы могли развивать свои креативные предприятия. Но раньше, чем начнем, я бы хотел дать слово директору PEAK Бишкек, Центра по развитию бизнеса и инноваций Искендеру Шаршиеву, который вам расскажет немножко больше про то, зачем существует PEAK и какую роль мы играем для вас. Искендер.
Отлично. Спасибо. Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники сегодняшнего нашего вебинара. Позвольте там буквально вкратце, да, в 5-6 минут, ну, в 3-5 минут рассказать о том, что такое PEAK Бишкек. Добро пожаловать в PEAK Бишкек. И в первую очередь, что это такое? Да? PEAK Бишкек финансируется правительством Великобритании. Это проект, который называется «Программа по развитию предпринимательства и инноваций», осуществляется организацией DAI Global в Кыргызской республике и Республике Таджикистан. Что такое PEAK? Да, PEAK – это, прежде всего, инкубатор-акселератор. У нас тут проходят инкубационные акселерационные программы. Что это такое? Это инкубация – это для тех, кто хочет начать бизнес и еще никогда не имел опыта создания бизнеса. Мы обучаем, как делать первые шаги. Акселерация – это те, кто уже делает бизнес уже несколько лет, но упирается в некий какой-то потолок, да, по прибыли и хочет расти дальше, стать больше. В обоих случаях мы помогаем людям найти пути, да, как именно обойти узкие места, проблемы, которые мешают развитию, и как развиваться дальше. И у нас есть для этого менторы, консультанты, квалифицированные, опытные бизнесмены, опытные эксперты, и такие вот эксперты, как международного масштаба, да, вот как сегодня господин Мартин Смит. Да. Также у нас ведутся тренинги, вебинары. Мы создаем международную сеть деловых связей, у нас есть партнеры, Gen, да, это глобальная сеть предпринимателей в 160 странах мира. Электронная платформа, все программы, которые у нас проходят по акселерации в предпринимательстве, все участники имеют возможность все время, да, пополнить свои знания, обратиться к нашей большой библиотеке знаний электронной. И выстраивается сеть связи с инвесторами. Благодаря им по окончанию акселерационных программ всегда можно будет найти себе партнера или инвестора. Мы уже провели 6 программ в Кыргызстане, ну, в Бишкеке, да, в частности. И сейчас на данный момент идут 2 программы. Вот бизнес-рост мы уже почти к конце программы. В ноябре у нас состоится демонстрационный день. И вот сейчас идет прям программа, которую, если вы занимаетесь швейным бизнесом, да, у вас есть уже предприятие, либо ИП, швейный цех, или у ваших друзей, родственников, знакомых, заходите к нам на сайт, сразу записывайтесь, подавайте заявку, потому что эта программа позволит швейникам пообщаться с людьми, да, которые уже много лет ведут экспорт в другие страны, страны ЕС, в дальнее зарубежье, и они помогут им организовать экспортные операции. Поэтому эта программа, она буквально осталось 9 или 8 дней до окончания этой программы, приема заявок, поэтому, пожалуйста, вот поделитесь, да, информацией, обязательно распространите, подавайте заявки. Также вот у нас мы организуем местные, международные мероприятия. Впервые в истории Кыргызстана нам в прошлом году, в этом году вот команда PEAK Kyrgyzstan организовала национальный финал чемпионата мира по предпринимательству. Сразу же в первый год 2 компании попали в топ-100 да, стартапов по миру из 160 стран. Так что тоже отслеживайте нашу активность и участвуйте в наших мероприятиях. У нас вот ведутся вебинары, очень интересные гостевые спикеры. У нас более 130 выпускников уже выпустилось. В нашу базу данных уже есть около 40 менторов. Наши выпускники некоторые, да, благодаря нам, надеемся, что на это, но в основном благодаря тому, что они очень волевые, да, бизнесмены, достигают определенных успехов. Некоторые уже имеют историю успеха. На нашем сайте тоже они опубликованы. Заходите, пожалуйста, ознакомьтесь. Знания, они действительно помогают, да, развиваться дальше. Это наша команда бишкекская, но следует помнить, что PEAK Kyrgyzstan – это большая команда, здесь больше 20 человек. У нас есть офис в Аше и в Караколе. Вот в этом офисе наша команда вот это. Пожалуйста, запоминайте, прошу любить и жаловать, и приходите в этот офис, как пандемию мы с вами победим. Да? Это наш сайт, наши соцсети на этих платформах. Пожалуйста, находите нас на этих платформах, подписывайтесь, потому что актуальная информация появляется каждый день. И что-то может оказаться нужным прямо вам. Спасибо за внимание. Все, не смею больше отнимать время у господина Смита.
Так, спасибо большое, Искендер. Позвольте мне немножко рассказать сегодняшнего мероприятия. Наш спикер будет иметь 20 минут для выступления своей презентации, и потом будет у вас достаточно много времени, чтобы вы задавали свои вопросы. Так как вы являетесь деятелями данной индустрии, да, мы просим вас задавать свои вопросы коротко и к теме, чтобы он мог больше информации рассказать и раскрыть для всех, и действительно ответил на то, что вас интересует. Да? И сейчас тогда позвольте мне представить нашего сегодняшнего гостя и спикера. Он приходит с Великой Британии, которая является одной из таких основных стран, где развита креативная экономика. И он сам приложил руку к развитию этой креативной экономики не только в Великой Британии, но и в других государствах. На своем счету он имеет очень много успехов и достижений в креативной экономике. Работал консультантом для государств по развитию креативной экономики, так государства Великой Британии, как и других стран. Он сам является активным в сфере медиа, культуры и других креативных индустрий. Он сам является экспертом по инвестированию в культурный контент, можем так сказать, там, например, театры, кино или другие там произведения искусства. И я уверен, когда он будет презентовать сегодня, вы поймете, что да, действительно, некоторые из них очень хорошо знаете, или как минимум вы видели, потому что они стали, я надеюсь, благодаря его поддержке, глобальным успехом и блокбастерами, как говорится на английском языке. Также публикует много в теме креативной экономики, является выступающим на Goldsmiths University Лондонского университета. В Киргизстане он присутствует для того, чтобы проконсультировал наши государства и госорганы по политикам креативной экономики. И я сам уверен, так как он является спикером и экспертом по креативной экономике, у него есть тоже еще очень много талантов, скрытых талантов, о которых пока не знаем. Да? Но я думаю, он нам сам расскажет больше. Пожалуйста, приветствуйте доктор Мартин Смит. Yeah. Please, dear Martin, we are honored to welcome you here today at the stage here at PEAK, where we try to provide all kinds of support for development of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in Kyrgyzstan to accelerate the growth of the startups and MSMEs. And we believe that your today's insights and sharing of your experience during the presentation and then during the Q&A session will allow them to grow and yes, for a significant impact in their businesses. Yes, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Anton. Thank you, everybody. Now, can I just try something? Interpreters at the back, can you hear without the microphone? Okay, in that case, I'll use a microphone. This is very unusual. People can usually hear me from miles away. Anyway, so thank you very much, Anton, for your introduction. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Let me just show you very quickly the ground that I'm going to cover, the kind of territory that I'm going to deal with in the next 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the emergence of what we call the culture and creative industries. I'm going to talk, because this is a business audience, I'm going to talk a bit about what we mean by creative enterprises. And I'm going to say a little bit about the requirements of being an entrepreneur in the creative sector. And then I'll conclude with a few words about what I believe to be the opportunity here in Kyrgyzstan. Well, let's just start with that. So as Anton was kind enough to say, I'll put it slightly differently. I'm a sort of strange person, really. I'm an unusual person in that I have 3 completely different jobs. I spend about 3 days a week working in investment business, in media investment business, for a company called Ingenious Media. And one of the things that we do is invest in films, and this is one of our films, which you may have seen, into which we put $30 million. So I'm very glad to say that it was a hit, and it was a profitable investment. I'm not going to say very much more about this, except to say that there is a reason why I refer to this film in particular, and that is that it represents an extraordinary example of the interaction of the creative impulse and high technology. The tiger you can see in front of you is, you will not be surprised to know, not a real tiger. The tiger is the product of something called CGI, computer graphic imaging, gazillions of images being manipulated brilliantly by the filmmaker and the director, Mr. Ang Lee, for which he won the Oscar in 2012 as the best director. So for 3 days a week, I do this kind of stuff, okay? And then, as Anton rightly said, for 1 day a week, I work in Goldsmiths University in London in something called the Institute for Cultural and Creative Entrepreneurship. Let me say in that connection how wonderful it is to be able to speak to a room full of live students, because for the last year, I have done all my teaching, all my supervising, all of my tutorials on Zoom. I have actually not been into my university for 18 months because of the pandemic. It's caused huge disruption, and I'm pleased to say that I will actually return next week. And then 1 day a week, I run my own business. So I am myself an entrepreneur, and we'll maybe talk a bit about that later. Now, just as a quick introduction to a discussion about entrepreneurship and business models. I have a friend in the academic life, and his name is Pierluigi Sacco. He's an Italian academic who teaches at Harvard University, the University of Padova. You will find him on the internet. If you type in Sacco plus Culture 3.0, you will find a more extended elaboration of the slide you can see in front of you. What Pierluigi says, very simply, is that you can understand the history of culture in terms of 3 phases. Before the 20th century, you have culture, what he calls 1.0. So that's very simple. Everything is paid for by a bishop or a prince somewhere. It's all personal patronage. And then in culture 2.0, you have the beginnings and then rapid development of mass entertainment industries, big media organizations, big cultural organizations, rapid expansion of audiences, drive for profit, and so on. In particular, you have the introduction of intellectual property as a requirement in much of the creative sector. And then you have issues like copyright and privacy, which are very important, or piracy, I should say, very important in the media world. Then Culture 3.0, Professor Sacco says, is the introduction of, as you see here, open digital platforms, dominance of big commercial platforms and online communities. You know, I'm talking about YouTube, Facebook, etc. You have the increasing emphasis on the idea of co-creation, the idea that consumers can interact with producers in developing new forms of content. And then you have the development of crowdfunding platforms and various. So this is a sort of big picture conceptual account of the way that the cultural sector has developed from a business and commercial point of view, going from, very simple patronage to the development of mass entertainment, big markets, drive for profit, and then the development of a platform-based cultural economy. Now, I put this up here just very quickly to indicate that for most of the world, cultural and creative industries as a kind of distinct form of industrial activity didn't really exist until very recently. The idea, the concept was developed in the UK at the end of the 1990s. But then in 2010, this document was published, Creative Economy Report 2010, by the United Nations. And it was an extraordinary moment because what happened was that the researchers discovered that the cultural and creative industries were growing at an extraordinary pace from around 2000 onwards. And what's even more extraordinary is that they discovered that they continue to grow right through the financial crash of 2008. That was really remarkable. I could say more about this report, but I won't because I will go over time. But that is a foundation document for anybody interested in this sector. And I will also just briefly mention the work of the British Council, because the British Council has done an enormous amount to popularize the ideas of the creative economy. And as you can see, it's done so in several languages, including Russian. This was the original publication, Introduction to Creative Economy. You can find it online in an updated version. I think the latest version is 2018. Now, this is where we get to the meat of it, and you'll begin to see why I used Sacco's kind of conceptual idea of the development of creative enterprise. If you look at the landscape of cultural and creative business, you will see a very, very complicated picture. Incidentally, one reason why politicians find it very hard to understand the creative industries is that it is genuinely difficult to get your head around the very different kind of models that you find in the sector. So just very quickly, you have some huge companies, media organizations in most countries like France, you have Vivendi, in Italy you have Mediaset, in Germany you have Bertelsmann, the UK you have BBC and various other very big companies. But they're not the most important part of the ecosystem. The most important part of the ecosystem is micro businesses. One of the things that distinguishes the cultural and creative sector from aviation or transport or utilities is that most companies are very small. If I just give you a concrete illustration of that, in the UK, there are nearly 300,000 businesses in this sector, nearly 300,000, of which 90% employ 4 people or less. 4 people or less. So this is a landscape dominated by very, very small companies. And here is this idea that I am about to present is the most complex idea in the entire presentation. So I'll take it a little more slowly. In the creative sector, there are essentially 2 different kinds of business. This is crucial to my presentation. So leave aside big media companies. They're unusual. These two different kinds of business are defined by their risk profile. So on the one hand, you have what I would call services businesses. So a design company, an advertising company, a PR company. It's a service business because it is designed to provide a service to another business. It's B2B, essentially. And so the risk profile is no different from a great many other businesses in other sectors. If you want to start a design company, what do you need? You need a laptop, you need a desk, you need a telephone, and training, of course. But most important is you need a client, or preferably 2 or 3 or 10 clients. But you can start a business of that kind with $200, right? Relatively low risk. And that is what I call a demand-led business. It's demand-led because there is a demand for the services provided by your company. Now, those are the services businesses here. The other sort of business is a content business, by which I mean a business that makes a film or makes a book or makes a video game or publishes it. And these essentially are projects in their nature. They're kind of prototypes. You know, Life of Pi is a film. It was a prototype. It's not a service. And the risk profile of this kind of business, which I call non-demand led, right? Non-demand led. Why do I call it non-demand led? Because you have to make it. You have to have it in the cinema. You have to have it in the bookshops before you can find whether there is a market for it or not. Okay. That presents an entirely different risk profile. I will come back and say more about that if you wish me to. It's quite a difficult idea to get your head around, but it's really fundamental. And it's fundamental to being an entrepreneur in these sectors or subsectors, and it's fundamental to the financing of those businesses. Bearing in mind that we want to spend as much time as possible on questions, I'm just going to leave this up here and say very little. Some things are obvious. If you want to be an entrepreneur in the cultural creative sector, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur on the content side of the business, high risk. You need a lot of determination, a lot of resilience, and you need to know that something will go wrong often. 9 out of 10 movies lose money, right? That's one place to start. On the venture capital side of things, I'm involved in that as well. 9 out of 10 businesses do not make it, right? Only roughly 1 in 10 business from a venture capital point of view in this sector, last for more than 3 years and become successful. So, you know, this is quite a risky area to be involved in. Something will go wrong. You will have failures. Believe me, I've had lots of failures. But I like to think, thank you very much, that I'm stronger and more successful in the end because I've had a lot of failures. I don't need to say very much about the rest of these points, good and bad ideas. My colleague and partner and boss, a man called Patrick McKenna, often says this to me and to others. Patrick says, good ideas are 10 a penny. You can find them anywhere. What matters is the execution of those ideas. And this is a point which is often missed by people when they are thinking about setting up a business. Actually, you can make money out of a bad idea as long as it's well executed. But a good idea can easily be destroyed by poor execution. Maybe we can come back to some of those points. I'm going to skip most of these in order to allow more time for discussion, I think. Let me just say something about the last bullet point here. The issue of access to finance is a very complicated one in the creative sector for the reasons that I have already indicated. Going back to what I said earlier, in a demand-led company, a services business, let's say a PR company or a design company, the need for finance is not extreme because generally the business is financed by your clients, right? No advertising business ever goes out and spends $5 million unless they have a client to pay for it. That's a fundamentally important point about the financing of these companies. Totally different in the film business, totally different in the music business. Because, you know, if you want to make a song, you want to make the video of the song, you've got to spend a lot of money up front. And you don't know whether you're going to get that money back. You really don't know. You're taking a big risk. And actually, from a business point of view, you can't take that risk unless you are very well capitalized, right? As a small micro business, you cannot take that risk on your own balance sheet. Because if you do, and it's a failure, you've taken down the whole company with you. So that introduces the notion of what we call special purpose vehicles. If anybody's interested in that, then I will be happy to discuss it. But I emphasize and re-emphasize the point that this is all to do with calibrations of risk. How much risk are you taking in working in one of these businesses? And our role as investors is always to attempt to mitigate risk as far as possible. We don't like risk any more than anybody else, but we take very big risks and we try to mitigate them in various ways. This is the last slide. I don't need to say very much about this except to say that when the global report of 2010, which I highlighted, came out a few years ago, Central Asia did not feature at all in this economy. This was a major piece of work with stats and data and case histories from dozens and dozens of countries. Nothing in Kazakhstan, nothing in Uzbekistan, nothing in Kyrgyzstan, nothing in Tajikistan. Why? Because there was no business data from any of these countries. That is now changing in all of these countries. I spent this morning talking with colleagues here who are working to improve that situation, to collect more and better data. I believe that once this data has started to be collected and is analyzed and understood more clearly by people in government, that there is a great opportunity here in Kyrgyzstan to grow this part of the economy. Why do I think that? Well, really for two reasons. First of all, currently, it's a very, very, very small part of the economy. It's around 1% insofar as we understand it. That compares with 3 to 4% in countries in the European Union, 6% in the UK. So it's very, very small at the moment. So it should be possible to grow it. And the second reason why I think that there is great room for optimism here is that the global market for cultural goods and services is growing. It's growing fast. It's continuing to grow fast. And I think it's quite possible for this country to seize a bigger part of that market. And then the final reason, and I'll close at this point, is to say that what I have seen in the short time that I've been here, and I have been here before as well, I was here 3 years ago, what I have seen suggests to me that there is the creative talent in fashion, in music, in animation, in film, in crafts, and elsewhere. And I believe through the efforts of PEAK and its partners, there will also be the business talent to enable this part of the economy to grow. What is required is for the business talent to work with the creative talent, okay? We need commercial skills as well as creative skills. And if you work together to harness, to combine the skills that I believe are emerging here, then there is a very bright future for the creative economy in Kyrgyzstan and what I call the Creative Kyrgyzstan project. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your presentation and insights. Now let's start some dialogue with our attendants, both here at PEAK, but also online through Zoom. Так, дорогие наши гости, да, сейчас у вас будет возможность задавать свои вопросы Мартину. Да, пожалуйста, поднимайте руки, я вас буду вызывать по одному. Но также у нас для участников, которые участвуют онлайн через Zoom, пожалуйста, пишите свои вопросы в чате. Да, мои коллеги будут мне эти вопросы отправлять, и мы их будем задавать. Да, вопросы, которые нас интересуют. Да, сразу даю вам возможность задать вопрос, да, вы будете первым. Так, только хотел я уточнить. Можете поднять руки те, кто здесь из тех видов бизнеса, которые предоставляют услуги? Как Мартин сказал, предоставляете креативные услуги, вы являетесь дизайнером, являетесь каким-то агентством. Хорошо. Понимаем. А кто из вас является, скажем так, художником? Да? Что-то мастерите, что-то рисуете, что-то из у вас театра и так далее. Хорошо. Окей. Супер. Great. So, Martin, one of the first questions I would like to ask, I would like to ask the first question, which is, you invest into various movies, theater, plays, shows, etc. Some of them are super successful, as the movie which you presented. I would like to ask, you as an investor or part of the investment fund or group, how do you decide which piece of art are you going to invest in? Let's imagine I am the guy who is doing some theater play. Which factors should I take into consideration? Will you take into consideration when you are deciding whether to invest in my play or not?
Well, that's a very good question. And so perhaps I should start by saying that we are fund managers for this purpose. So we manage funds, and we have about 5,000 investors, some of whom are private individuals, some of whom are institutions. So we have funds which we manage, and we also occasionally invest from our own company balance sheet. Now, to come directly to your question, we have funds which invest directly in new companies or aspiring companies in the manner of venture capital investment. Actually, we're not doing very much of that at the moment. We have done a lot of it in the past. Like all venture capital, it's very difficult territory. Most of our investments, I would say, were not successful, but we had 3 or 4 which were huge successes. And that's what you always hope for, of course. If you ask me the question, how did you choose? Then, of course, that's a fascinating question. And the answer is, we take our time. we look at a business plan. Everybody who comes to look for investment within the context of a VC environment, everybody has their business plan. They walk in through the door. And what does the business plan look like? It always looks like this. What we call the hockey stick. Because if you start a business, you always think it's going to go like this, right? The serious part of the answer to your question is we take our time. We meet the people who are behind the company, not once or twice, but 12, 15, 20 times. And we go through their proposal. And usually, by the time we have finished and decided to make the investment, the business plan looks totally different from the one that they started with. So it is a process of collaboration, of inquiry, of dialogue, of refinement, and the most important thing is really getting to know the entrepreneur, getting to know the team. Because in the end, you are investing in a proposition, but mostly you're investing in people. And you have to make a judgment about whether you trust those people or not. Now, that's the venture capital part of the answer to your question. It's not the biggest part of what we do at the moment. In fact, it's quite small. The biggest part is the content investment, is particularly in film, but we've done a lot of TV drama. We used to own the UK's biggest live music festival company, right? We ran 6 different festivals, Liverpool, Dorset. We invented a jazz festival, all sorts of things. We sold that business 3 or 4 years ago. But some of the same principles operate. But when it comes to film specifically, we actually don't make judgments ourselves. We trust our partners. So if you're financing a film, what you're doing is you're backing a production company. So we partner with production companies, and we partner with sales agents and distributors and so on. And when it comes to selecting films, we select on the basis of the judgment of our partners. We have to do it that way, if I can conclude the answer, because I will explain why. Because every week we get 500 letters with 500 film scripts from people who think that they are going to be the next Martin Scorsese, right? And that is in the nature of the business. It's hugely competitive. We can't read 500 film scripts a week, so we rely on the judgment of our partners.
Thank you very much. Представить себя, меня так и так зовут, занимаюсь тем, занимаюсь компанией и так далее. И задайте свой вопрос. Постарайтесь помнить вот 30 секунд, чтобы мы с ним могли задать.
Добрый день. Меня зовут Рашид, я бренд-креатор. Разработчик брендов. 27 лет этим занимаюсь. В Москве где-то лет 15, 4 года в Молдове, в Казахстане. У меня такой вопрос. Значит, у вас есть программа инвестирования в Кыргызстане, вот, создание фильмов, или вы работаете только на европейский рынок? Это первый вопрос. Сейчас.
You want me to answer?
Да,
Yeah.
да.
Okay. The answer is, it follows the answer I have just given in a way. We work with producers who we know and trust. And that means that sometimes we end up working in other countries. So we have made movies in Romania, we have made movies in Australia, we've made movies in lots of places. But that is based on, for example, the facilities that are available in any particular country. You need studio facilities, location facilities. You need the talent. You need the crews. You need the skills, and that's one of the things that define where you make stuff. Of course, it does also depend fundamentally on what the story is. You know, I mean, the story. You know, you take a film like Life of Pi, which is kind of a fantasy story. You could make that in any country, providing they have, you know, the skills to do the real live stuff. It gets even more complicated because as I'm sure you know, many countries have tax incentives to attract film and television production into that country, right? Now, let's be clear what this means. It means that that country will pay 20%, 18%, 20%, up to 30% in some countries. They will pay 20% of the production cost, which means that it's very attractive for an incoming production company. So 110 countries have these tax regimes, around 110 at the last count. And the last two that I came across were Mongolia and Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan introduced a tax incentive for film and television production last year. I don't know anything about it, but it's logged. So, sir, the answer to your question is quite complicated because it depends on, one, is there a fiscal incentive in place to attract production? And there is none in Kyrgyzstan, I can tell you, I've looked it up. Two, it depends on the kind of facilities that exist. You need very high quality production facilities to satisfy, for example, most American or British production companies. And thirdly, it depends on the story. We've certainly never done anything in this country because the conditions don't exist at the moment to enable the highest level of film production. That would require some investment by the authorities here.
И второй вопрос. Вот вы участвуете? И вот второй вопрос. Вы участвуете в каких-нибудь фестивалях, проводимых здесь, вот, в Кыргызстане, в кинофестивале? Если у вас драматическое кино, вот, допустим, в Казахстане там фестивали проводятся, допустим, французского кинематографа, там, французского юмора, да? Вот, а вы со своими фильмами будете участвовать здесь? Вот, или когда это будет вообще? Интересно.
The answer is that our films appear in festivals when they are invited to do so. You know, there needs to be an invitation to. Normally, it would not come to us because we're the investors behind it. You know, it comes to the production company. But yes, I mean, our films currently, at the moment, we're financing between 20 and 30 films a year, right? Between 20 and 30. That's a lot. That's more than anybody else in the UK. All of those films will be seen in festivals somewhere. All of them. They'll be seen in Berlin. They'll be seen in Venice. They'll be seen in Toronto. They'll be seen in Rome. These are the main, and Cannes, of course. So the main festivals, our films will always appear. There is a second part of the answer to the question, which is that I personally am interested in film festivals. So I've been invited to speak at the Odessa Film Festival twice, for example. So I've done so, but that's more to do with me as a person who is interested in film festivals. It's not a business consideration. It's more because I'm interested in doing that.
Thank you very much. Martin, we have like 42 attendants online, but still we have no question from them. So I'd like to really ask you to be active and ask your questions very briefly so Martin can answer more questions. Now the next from the audience.
Здравствуйте. Дело в том, что я сама далека от кинематографии, я глава консалтинговой компании, но моя дочь в этом году закончила USLA, а до этого она отучилась на режиссера в Голливуде, в Нью-Йоркской академии. И сейчас они, молодежь, начали снимать определенные небольшие фильмы в Америке, но к лету они собираются приехать в Кыргызстан. Мы сейчас готовимся, делаем несколько сценариев, именно которые интересны, которых не было в темах мировых каких-то кинопрокатов. Особенно это касается темы басмачества, если вы об этом слышали, темы таких вот вещей, которые умалчивались во время Советского Союза. И какие у вас требования ваших инвесторов, какие именно требования к бизнес-плану, чтобы эта молодая группа, они все уже снимают фильмы, это маленькая кинокомпания в Америке, и там несколько кыргызов наших ребят. Какие требования у вашего фонда, что нужно им подать, куда, чтобы вы рассмотрели?
Martin, I think we slightly answered the question is quite similar to my first question, isn't it? But do you have anything to add, please?
Just one extra comment on that. UCLA is very good, by the way. It's UCLA is that's the world's second best film school. The world's best film school is called the National Film and Television School in the UK. But the answer to your question is, well, let me put it back to you. If you are an investor, why would you put money into a film or any other project? Answer, you want to get a return on investment. You want to make money from such an investment. And therefore, from a film point of view, you need to know that there is a market, that there is a possible interest in such a movie. And I have to say this is getting more and more difficult because, well, there are all sorts of reasons. Independent cinema, which is what you're talking about, you know, cinema which makes stories of the kind that you're talking, you know, life here in the 1920s, the whites versus the Bolsheviks, whatever. There is not a huge global market for that kind of film. And that means that you have to think very carefully about who your distributors are going to be. There's another part of the answer, which is a lot of films get made which are never seen. Why? Because they are not selected by distributors. I mean, this is an incredible thing that people spend $3 million, $5 million making a film which is never seen, or it may be seen at 2 or 3 film festivals. Now, here things are getting a little better because you can put a film straight onto the internet, for example. And also Netflix are changing things in an important way. You know, it may well be that your daughter with an idea about making a film about the whites versus the Bolsheviks in the 1920s should talk to the regional director at Netflix for Central Asia. Because Netflix are now doing some quite interesting things. They are making programs in French, with French production crews, with French stories in France. That would have been unimaginable only 5 years ago. They are looking for local stories with a global appeal. You know, we have this idea of glocalism. So my answer to you must be a combination of caution and optimism. It may be that you can find somebody like Netflix who would be willing to back. But for an independent production with a niche story in a small country, that's otherwise a very difficult proposition because you wouldn't be able to get distribution for it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I will come to you later. So we have the first question from Zoom. It is from Kuban. The question is basically how a content creator or movie creator should approach your investment fund to attract the finance for the creative economy. Should we just visit the website of the fund, or some specific actions they should take to approach you?
Sorry, so you can repeat that?
Yeah. So basically the question is from Kuban, from Zoom. He's asking like how to approach your fund to attract your investments for some creative economy projects. Should they just basically visit your website, or what is the best way to approach or to pitch to you, let's say, to reach you?
Right, it's a simple question with a very complicated answer. It very much depends on the project. Maybe I should say, first of all, that media investment, film, television, etc., is only one part of our group, right? So the Ingenious Group as a whole invests in other areas of the economy, including property and education and infrastructure, meaning energy infrastructure. So the part that I represent here is just one part of the company. And the reason why the story gets more complicated in terms of answering this question relates to a word which I so far haven't used at all in this presentation, and I now must use it for the first time: COVID. The pandemic has had a disastrous effect on large parts of the cultural and creative sector in our country. Enormously damaging effects. Our music industry has lost 70% of its jobs, 70%. So 70,000 people do not have jobs, which they had 2 years ago. That's an example of how bad the pandemic has been for that part of the creative sector, which is live. So it's based on performing live. It will recover, but it will take time. It will take 3, 4, 5 years for those parts of the economy to recover. But the question, of course, is about the media part of the creative economy, the audio-visual part. But that also has been badly affected by the pandemic. So let me explain to you what happened. In our country, the pandemic closed all businesses from March the 23rd, 2020, everything closed. Everything stopped. There was no film production. There was no TV production. There couldn't be, because the instruction from the government was stay at home. Everything stopped. So then after 2 months or 3 months, the film and TV production industry wanted to start working again. You know, they were desperate to restart, but they couldn't because they had no insurance. You know, the agent for Brad Pitt said he could not possibly work in any film being produced unless there was proper insurance, so that if he got COVID and sued the production company for $50 million, there was some way of being protected from it. So the disaster in the film and production and TV production sector was a consequence of there being no insurance. So what then happens? I'm sorry, Anton, this is necessarily a long answer, but it's important. So the government said, well, we've got to start this business up again. You know, it's too important for us. So what we, the government, will do is put together a £500 million fund, which will provide insurance for all of the TV and production activity that is waiting to begin. So they did. So the government, after 4 months, puts in a £500 million insurance product. So the industry then restarted. So we then start getting production again, but it's slowly. In the meantime, all the cinemas are closed. The cinemas are closed. You can't go in by law. In the UK, at one stage, the cinema industry was losing £6 million a day. Can you imagine? £6 million a day. So against this background, we poor investors, we Ingenious cannot raise any investment funds. Of course we can't. How can you raise investment funds when people are saying, well, the cinemas are closed and they might be closed next year and they might be closed the year after that. So this is a very long, necessarily long way of saying that in this part of our business, COVID has destroyed our business model, and it will only recover when we know that the pandemic is behind us. And we don't know that yet. Cinemas have opened. One of our films had its premiere 5 weeks ago. I was there, a film called Dream Horse. And I was there in Leicester Square for the opening night. The 2 seats next to me were empty. The 2 seats next to me that side were empty. Government instructions on how many people can sit together. So Anton, I took an hour to mention the word pandemic, but in our country, it's had a devastating effect. My sense it's not so devastating in Kyrgyzstan, but I may be wrong about that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we can discuss it afterwards, like how was the situation before and how is it now. Now I have the question, which is regarding one of the latest trends, I would say, in arts and content, and it's from Daniel. He's from Zoom. He's asking, what do you think about NFTs? NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Is it real? Does it has some real value? Because some people consider it art, some people see it as the valuable element of creative for the music, content, arts, etc.
I do understand the question. I don't think I'm the best person to answer it, in the sense that I observe that the value of non-fungible tokens is increasing. I know that in the art markets, some of these products command considerable prices. I think earlier this year, one such product was sold for $1 million for the first time. But I don't really have a sense myself of how this will work out. I mean, I have to say that, the art market, the international art market is pretty hard to understand at the best of times. And people will pay huge amounts of money based on a sudden shift in taste or fashion. One understands why Rembrandt goes for $50 million or $100 million or a Picasso. But when non-fungible tokens start selling for $1 million, I have to say that I don't really quite understand it myself.
Здравствуйте, коллеги. Я бы хотел задать вопрос. Вот вы упомянули, что инвестиции происходят в кино, там, отрасль какие-то там. А в вашей практике было ли, что вы инвестировали в медицину, то есть на новые инновации? То есть страны, где, так скажем, хромает вопрос медицины, новых инноваций. И возможно ли это вообще? Хочу услышать ваше мнение. Да.
The simple answer is no. we haven't. But other people do. Of course, in medicine, most investment is done by big international drugs companies, and the way in which new medical products come to market is usually done through a process of R&D, we call it, research and development, which is very, very, very expensive and is incentivized by tax incentives. In the UK, we have things called R&D tax incentives. But a famous drug like Valium, for example, took 15 years to develop, requires huge amounts of upfront investment. And it's done by pharmacists. We don't invest in medicine.
Здравствуйте всем. Hello, Smith. Welcome to Kyrgyzstan. I am Tusnai and I am a geologist, but I'm planning about the startup. So my questions, I am a new, I can say new startup. New startup. Yes. Thank you. But it's an idea. So my question is, do you fund the startups from idea? And the second question is about, do you start the investment now? Because you said just now during the pandemic, everything stopped. So do you start now to fund? And if you start, then do you focus on a background of startups? 3 questions.
Okay. Thank you for the question. We're not doing very much of this kind of investing now. We have in the past. Usually we did not invest in startups. We invested in early stage companies. So we invested in companies which were maybe 1 year or 2 years old, which had some sort of track record, as we say, some kind of, they could produce some sort of evidence of commercial traction, of there being a market. But nevertheless, your question is very interesting, and I am going to reflect on what we have done and maybe explain a little about why we're not doing it at the moment. It's interesting that we set up a fund to invest in such companies in the year 2006. And it was a public fund. So we raised a lot of money. We raised 150 million pounds. So this was a quoted company. And our timing could not have been worse. Because what happened, within a year, there was a financial crash. And it became very, very difficult. Now, we ran that fund for several years, but the financial climate was not good. And one of the things that we learned was that in order to be effective as investors in startup companies or early stage companies, is that our executives needed to spend a lot of time with those companies to help them in their process of growth and development. And that's a very expensive thing to do, to commit a lot of executive time. So that was one problem. But then you come to something which is much more difficult, I think. Normally, if we invested in a company, and this would still be true because we do occasionally do it now. We still do it now occasionally. But if we invest in a company, we take 25% of the ownership. That is standard practice in venture capital. right? So we would take 25% of the company and we would put a director on the board of that company. And that's sometimes an experience that goes wrong. Sometimes relationships deteriorate. Sometimes there is conflict between the owner of the business and the founder, the entrepreneur that started, and the investors, the investment company. And we had that experience on several occasions. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for the founder. It's not good for the investor. And, you know, slowly we came to realize that this is a very difficult thing to do. And we moved away from early stage businesses. I'm often asked for advice by companies which are startups. You didn't ask for it, but I'll give it to you anyway. And that is, you know, when you're starting up a business, you want to keep absolutely as much control of it as possible for as long as possible. You don't want to give shares 15%, 25%. You don't want to give part of your business away to investors in the early stages of your business. You need to keep fundamentally, you know, 100% ownership for as long as possible. Meet your financing requirements through other ways, you know, loans, money from banks, debt, any other form of financing, rather than giving equity to an investor like ourselves. We learned that the hard way. Sometimes it works perfectly well. You know? Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying it always goes wrong, but I have had experience of it going wrong. And if it does, it's very unpleasant. You know, when you have a serious argument with your investors. I mean, I've seen some really bad situations. So, you know, I've learned to take the view that early stage companies, or startups in particular, but even when you're employing maybe 10 people, 12 people, you've grown to a certain size, you want to keep out external investors for as long as possible. Does that help? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Martin, the next question is coming from Zoom, from Jafar. Mr. Smith, building on the COVID input that you just talked about, what do you think? What do you think there is a realistic chance, let's say, window of opportunity to attract investments to specific creative sectors in Kyrgyzstan because of softer restrictions taken by government?
Because of softer restrictions.
Yes, as the economy is not as closed as it's in the case of some European countries or UK, is there some opportunity to develop or to grow the specific sectors of creative economy in Kyrgyzstan, and are they worth of investment?
I think, to be honest, I'd have to say I don't know, because I don't really have enough knowledge of the investment climate here, or of the range of financial facilities that exist. However, you know, I will say something which I have been sharing with colleagues during discussions this week, which is that in order to grow the sector as a whole, in order to grow the creative economy, clearly there needs to be investment in it. And it seems to me unlikely that much of that investment would come from the public sector, because the government doesn't have very much money. You know, there are no state investment funds that I'm aware of that are relevant in this area. And in any case, the cultural and creative sector grows and develops best when it is driven by the private sector and driven by private investors. Now, I think, Anton, I'd have to put this back as a question in a way. How many people here are familiar with the notion of angel investors? I mean, does everybody know what I mean by angel investors? So what this is about is private individuals. Sometimes we call them high net worth individuals, people who have money to invest. So they're rich people, essentially. In our country, we group such investors together in what are sometimes called angel funds. And what I am suggesting to colleagues here in Kyrgyzstan is that it is necessary to develop a network of angel investors. I mean, I believe that it would be helpful to the creative economy to make links with private individuals who can assist the growth of startup and early stage companies by investing their private money into those enterprises. Now, that's something which is easy for me to say because I know that it works in my country and other countries. That I would guess there is probably little history of it here, probably no history at all. So somebody would need to begin the process of establishing such funds. Somebody needs to do the organization work of starting one angel network or more than one angel network. That's quite a complicated thing to do. Has to be done by somebody who really understands investment business and really understands creative markets. But I do believe that that is one path forward. And it's likely to be a better source of finance than banks, right? Banks, normal banks, you know, they're good at doing money transmission. They do savings and borrowing, but their normal commercial banks are not very good at investing in this sector because they don't understand it. They don't understand it. They don't understand the risk factors. And that's why I say angel investors are a better route forward. I mean, I would like to suggest the development of independent cultural investment funds in this country. I mean, I think if you have one entrepreneur who has the vision and the imagination and the commercial experience to persuade some other people to create such a fund, then that's likely to be the best way forward in terms of financing growth. But please understand me, you do need investment money, and in particular at the audio-visual end, film and television and video games, these are capital-intensive businesses. So you really need access to substantial sums of money.
Thank you very much. My following question is related, I would say. Our market is actually relatively small, especially for theaters, artists, movie producers, etc. We are restricted to some, let's say, 6 million of citizens of the Kyrgyz Republic, also the language, etc. I would like to ask you, what are the best strategies for creatives operating in small markets? Yes, and what platforms should be utilized to promote the services and export the services to global audience?
Well, it's a good question, and it's difficult to give a wholly reassuring answer, but it does connect with a question which from the gentleman at the front, which I was trying to answer before. Film festivals play a critical role in providing marketplaces for small films or bigger films with more niche appeal, if you like. And it is amazing how many film festivals there are in the world now. In the UK, there are over 50 film festivals. And I noticed 3 weeks ago that a town which is very close to where I was born and brought up, which is called Worcester, which is most famous for its cathedral and its river, but has a population of only 80,000 people, has its own film festival. I don't know, is there a film festival in Narin? Is there a film festival in Osh? Is there a film? I mean, the development of film festivals, I think, is one of the most extraordinary things that's happened in the last 25, 30 years. And it's really interesting which festivals have grown up and become large and attract really big, really large international audiences. Let me give you an example. Sarajevo. Sarajevo is most famous for, well, it's famous for two things. One is it's famous because that's where Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in 1914, which started the First World War. But of course, more recently, it was the subject of appalling civil war between the Serbs and the Croats and the Bosnians in Yugoslavia. So a country riven by ethnic conflict. And at the end of that war, that process of civil war, Sarajevo says, its leaders say, we are going to start a film festival. And now it's one of the biggest film festivals in Europe. So film festivals are really important for the development of small films or films made in small countries. But the other part of the answer, I think, is that there are online film communities which are substantial. And this is not a part of the business I know extremely well, but I know that there are online markets for films made in small countries. I can tell you, for example, that this very week in London, in Shaftesbury Avenue, in the Curzon Cinema, there is a festival of Romanian cinema, right? And they are able to sell tickets to large numbers of people who are interested in Romanian films. So there are niche markets in the film industry. But the other part of the answer is that you have to control your costs, really, really control your costs. If the potential market is very small, then the potential budget has also to be kept very, very low, probably below $1 million, because you will not make money with small potential audiences if you spend too much money on that. This is a message which is very unpopular with people, but controlling the costs of production is a big part of the answer.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for honesty. We have, let's say 10 minutes left. So like it's time for 3 or 4 very quick questions and answers.
Добрый вечер. Добрый вечер.
Good evening.
Меня зовут Гульнара. Я учредитель общественного фонда, который занимается культурными проектами. И у нас есть авторская телепрограмма, телепроект, вообще детский проект, частью которого является телепроект. И вот по этому поводу у меня вот такой вопрос. Это первый вопрос. Какова перспектива телевидения, на ваш взгляд? Потому что в связи с последними тенденциями развития соцсетей телевидение, ну, как бы теряет свои позиции. Ну и еще второй вопрос. В связи с тем, что мы производим детский контент, мы столкнулись с такой проблемой, что по нашему законодательству нельзя прерывать программу на рекламную паузу. У нас пару лет была возможность привлекать спонсора телевизионного проекта. И Но потом как-то они отошли от спонсорства. Но одной из причин было то, что вы нашу рекламу показываете перед программой и после программы. Вот как решается этот вопрос именно создания детского контента в Великобритании? Фильмов, телепрограмм. Вот, было бы хорошо узнать опыт ваш. Спасибо.
Martin, I'd like to ask to answer all the questions, but briefly so that we get the opportunity.
All questions what, sorry?
I'm going to ask you to answer all the questions.
Yeah, yes. No. Thank you very much for the question. And it's a very interesting question. First of all, you have to look at what kids are looking at now. By kids, I mean 10, 12, 15-year-olds. We can see in the UK that children are watching less and less and less television. The statistics are very, very clear. They spend all their time on YouTube. Of course, there is also television on YouTube, but the idea of linear broadcasting, as you and I understand it and have done all our lives, that model of distributing children's content is beginning to disintegrate. It's not going to go away completely. Don't misunderstand me, but children's content, the world of children's content is changing dramatically. And I know this because we ourselves at Ingenious do invest in this area. We have an interest in one company in particular that makes children's television shows. And we're interested in this company because it has one cartoon show in particular, which is educational content. It's called Daisy and Ollie, actually. And they have a contract with a national broadcaster for the next 2 years. So we know that this company will sell its programs to national television, but also they have contracts in China and elsewhere to sell and distribute this program with subtitles, of course. Now, in other words, I have some familiarity with this market, but it is going to get more difficult for the reasons that I mentioned. And you raise an important question, which is restrictions on advertising. You know, one of the ways companies make money from children's television is they sell merchandise. Do you know what I mean by that? So they sell the goods, the models, the puppets, all of the games that go with a TV show. So Postman Pat has all kinds of merchandise available, and that's a source of revenues. And it's an important consideration in investing. We also have restrictions on advertising, you know, and this is because the authorities do not want kids to be exploited by big games companies, big toy companies, essentially. So it's a difficult market. And it's becoming more difficult. So I think the future is going to be more online. It's going to be more online than traditional broadcast. And I'm not sure how it's going to be financed. It's a difficult one for regulators. And even at this very moment, the regulators in the UK are looking at this area to see whether changes need to be made.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question.
No need. Hello, Mr. Smith. My name is Nursultan, and my question is, I'm not sure if my question is related with your seminar or not, but anyway, I want to give it because you at least you are a professor from UK. And my question is, what's the best way to run a business remotely? And second question is, what's your opinion about prospects of telemedicine in Kyrgyzstan? Thank you.
The second question is?
The prospects of telemedicine in Kyrgyzstan.
I still the prospects of what in Kyrgyzstan?
Of telemedicine, he means that remote contact with the doctor, etc., doing consulting with doctor remotely. Okay. The question is, what do you see? What are the prospects of telemedicine? He means that remote appointments with the doctor.
Oh, with
I see.
Sorry, I didn't hear. I apologize. Well, that's a difficult one. There are lots of new businesses emerging in this area because of the pandemic. Right now, if you live in London, you cannot get an appointment to see a doctor. It's impossible to see a doctor face to face. The only way you can have contact with a doctor is by telephone or by an internet connection, or if it's an emergency, then you can have an appointment and a doctor will come and see you. Why is this? The answer is that in our system, the pandemic has placed such an enormous burden on general practitioners that they are spending all of their time dealing with, for example, the vaccination program. And it's caused huge difficulties. So clearly there is an opportunity for remote access to medical practitioners. It already exists. There are already businesses that provide it, but they are businesses in the private sector, and they are operated as part of private insurance. So if you have a private insurance policy, which are expensive, then you get private remote access to doctors, but it's not available to people who are getting the National Health Service free. It may be possible in the future, I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question for today.
Добрый вечер. I will just introduce myself in Russian and then I'll ask a question. Меня зовут Назгуль, я представляю Ассоциацию креативных индустрий в Кыргызстане. И хочу задать вопрос доктору Мартину. Martin, you mentioned in your speech about these angel investors. So angel investors, if we consider British experience as one of the successful in development of creative economy, and you have that experience, and in the sense of, and in the example of existing conditions in Kyrgyzstan, where we are just getting used to this term, like creative economy, what can be maybe your hints or tips how to involve rich people to support probably some startups or maybe some creative economy projects in our conditions? Thank you.
Thank you, Nazgul. Nazgul is, she was too modest to introduce herself, is the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of the Association of Creative Industries in Kyrgyzstan, which was announced publicly the day before yesterday. So one of the things that I have not yet said, but I will say it now before answering Nazgul's question, is that a very important change has taken place this week in Kyrgyzstan, which is the inauguration of the first representative body of the whole of the sector, the whole of the cultural sector, creative industries sector, coming together in the form of an association, a professional association, designed to provide a network for companies and individuals who are working in the sector, provide a network, provide support for, help to devise policies for, act as a lobbying organization to government, and so on. So we should just note the establishment of that association. I think it's an important event here in this country. And I was very honored to be invited by the association to act as an advisor to them, and happy to accept. Now, Nazgul, to your question, therefore, the idea of angels, as we call them, or rich private investors, this is one part of our landscape. It's one part of our private sector landscape. It's a big subject, but in the music business, the film business, television business, in the private sector of the creative economy, you tend to have two different sorts of investors, right? So let me do a bit of analysis, business analysis. You have two different kinds of investors. You have what we call trade investors and what we call independent investors. What do I mean by that? Trade investors are existing companies which provide funds to develop new product lines or spin-off businesses. So, for example, Universal Music, which is the world's biggest music company, will invest in new businesses in the UK if they think there is potential for them. That's not a philanthropic act. It's commercial activity. And that is an example of what we call trade investment, investment by the trade, by the industry itself. And we don't have good statistics on this, but my intuition after 15 years in this business is that trade investors provide something like 80 to 90% of all the investment, private sector investment that goes into the sector. So that brings me to the other category of independent investors. And angel investors are part of that subsector. So venture capital funds are also part of that. Banks are also part of it, but the banks tend not to be very good at investing in creative industries. They don't really understand it. There's very little bank investment into the sector. So that does leave you with high net worth investors, as we call them, or angels, if you want to call them. And you can organize them in different ways. One way to do it is, as I suggest, the organization of angel investors into groups. But the other way is through tax incentivized private investment funds in which people with middling levels of income can invest. Now, this is a complex and it's highly regulated area. But we, for example, at Ingenious have operated many funds, regulated funds, the purpose of which is to attract investment from individual people to do certain things. Not just, they need to have a specific remit. So to invest in film, or to invest in TV production, or to invest in games, or whatever it is. So these are regulated investment funds. They are regulated by what we call the Financial Conduct Authority. They have to be regulated, otherwise people, would be, there would be the danger of investors being ripped off in some way. So it's regulated, and here is the point. And I think this is this would be a very advanced idea for Kyrgyzstan. They're not only regulated, but there is an incentive, a financial incentive to do it, approved by government and administered by the tax authority. So we have something called the Enterprise Investment Scheme, EIS, Enterprise Investment Scheme. These are regulated, this is a regulated arrangement which incentivizes investors to put their money into high-risk companies, and they get a tax relief of 30%. 30%, that's a very high level. But the condition is that they have to be invested in risk companies. So they must be prepared to lose all of their money if that company goes wrong. So what I'm describing to you, Nazgul, rather hastily, because it's a very complicated area, what I'm describing to you is an investment landscape or a set of conditions developed over many years, but which is calculated to encourage private investment. Now, I have no idea whether there is any such thing in Kyrgyzstan. I rather doubt it, because these funds have existed in the UK for 30, 40, 50 years. Right? But it is an area which I think the association and its allies and friends will want to look at, because you will want to find ways of encouraging investment, encouraging investors to be interested in this area. And that will involve finding ways of persuading the government to be friendly to this kind of activity. And that means possibly tax reliefs. It certainly means financial incentives of some sort. Otherwise, people won't take the risk. So sorry, that's a very long answer to your question. In fact, all my answers are too long.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Unfortunately, it was the last question for today, because I believe that as the creative economy just uprising in Kyrgyzstan, we would be able to talk for at least 1 hour, and because both offline and online audience has a lot of questions. But yes, unfortunately, it was just like 1.5 hours for today. And I hope that once in the future, you will have the opportunity to visit Kyrgyzstan again and see the initial results of the seeds which you basically planted today. So on behalf of all the audience, both audiences in Zoom and offline, also on behalf of PEAK, I would like to really thank you for your presence and sharing it with us your very valuable experience and insight. Thank you very much. It was important for us. Yes. Thank you. Так, дорогие участники, Спасибо большое за ваше активное участие. Запись данной сессии, данной встречи будет у нас размещена на социальных сетях, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter и так далее, или в нашем YouTube, поэтому следите за нашими социальными сетями, где увидите, может, запись, но и будете осведомлены о других мероприятиях, которые PEAK Kyrgyzstan проводит для предпринимателей. Спасибо большое.